Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Server-Side Web Development. This is Lecture 9. Today, we're going to be covering RESTful controllers, RESTful routes. So RESTful is a way of structuring your application to meet certain expectations. Usually the whole idea of REST is associated with APIs, but you can use them for standalone applications as well. So this is sort of a convention of how you will structure your application. And I'll show you how we do that with Laravel. And then we'll wrap the whole thing up with talking about forms and how we can create forms in Laravel and more specifically process those forms in Laravel. All right. Are there any questions before we get started? Okay, I'm not hearing any questions, so let's jump right into RESTful controllers. All right, so like I was mentioning, when we talk about REST, it's a type of structure, a convention that we use when creating our applications. And what we're talking about here, RESTful controllers, we're talking about what names of methods we should have and what will those methods do. So from last week, you remember that we created a method called index, and this index was used to display all items. And generally, this is because this will be the home page of your site. Say, for example, if you were building a blog in Laravel, well, the home page, the index, would display all of the posts that you would want to show to the user, or maybe the most recent ones. But that would be the index method, and that's the one we used last week. But there are many other conventional method names that we will be using. For example, if we wanted to show just one of our items, say one blog post, we might use the name show. So this will be the function or method name show, and it would then retrieve a single item from the database and then display it on a display page of some kind. And I'll go show you all the code for this here in a moment in the next slide. After show, we might want to, for creating a new item, so if we wanted to add new items for that, it's a two-step process because the first step is to display the create form to create that item, to create that blog post or create that movie. So we'll have a method that's just called create, and all it does is display the form that we would want that will be displayed so that we can fill out the information to create it. Now, to actually process that form, to store it into the database, we would use a method called store. And that's what actually inserts the data that was retrieved from the form to the database itself. And then, of course, we need to edit items, make changes to the items. So again, we would have just an edit method that would display the form that would edit the item. Now, create and edit will be very similar. They could even share the same form. The only difference would be is that the edit form would be pre-filled with with ever the item's data. In this case, if it's a post, it might be the post title and the post text. If it's a movie, the movie title, director name, so forth. So the form would be pre-filled. But again, all it's doing is displaying the form. Once that form is submitted, it would go to the update method. And the update method is what will add or update the item to the database. All right, so here we have, again, if you remember our CRUD, that's create, read, update, and delete. You can see that we have our reads in index and show. We have our create in create and store. We have our update and edit and update. And then the last one is our delete. So we would store, anytime we want to delete an item, we would use the destroy method. That's the standard convention name for that. So we would have a destroy method, which would remove the item from the database. All right, so that's an overview of the names. Now I'm going to show you, I have a bunch of slides showing you what the code might look like. And these are all associated with the Movie Mayhem database that we're working with. So here's the index one. This we've actually seen this from last week. So again, we'd have a public function with name of index, and it's going to retrieve all of the movies. So we'll do this using the all method that, again, that Laravel provides for us. This is part of the Eloquent library, the Eloquent interface that allows us to make queries much easier than using PDO and writing the queries manually. So we're calling the movie model, which we had created previously, and then we're using the all method, and that will retrieve all of the movies as an array, and then we'll store it to the movies variable. Then we'll pass it to the movies view. And that's the index, and we discussed that last week. Now, show, for example, will be similar, but it will, again, show, it will show just one item. Now, the way it's going to show this one item is we're going to pass the ID of that item through the URL. And we'll cover roots here in the next section of this lecture, so we'll see what the roots look like. They really should have come first, but so we're going to show that, but we'll get that ID from the root, from the URL, and we'll be able to then use that ID to find the movie we're looking for. And we use the find method for that. Now, the find method, it's an Eloquent method, only works with the primary key. So the ID of the column ID that we're working with. So we can't use it with other columns, only with the primary key. If we're looking for other columns, we would have to use the where method. But here, because we're looking for the primary key, we can just use find, and it's going to return that movie. And then we can, of course, pass it to a new view, in this case called details. All right, and that would then show the details for that specific movie.
I have a question.
Yes.
For those function names, the index or the last one, the show,
Yes.
is it like a preset function name, or it's just a variable name we can name
No,
it?
you can call these whatever you want. These are just conventions that developers of Laravel and developers of other RESTful applications have decided that this is probably the convention so that the convention we're going to use. We're all going to use these same names. That just makes it easier for us to understand everybody's application. Do you have to follow these? No, you can call them whatever you want. But again, these are just conventions that we're saying, oh, well, if you're going to build an application like this, this is the names we recommend you use.
Okay, but the public is a kind of a method or
so we have public there. That just refers to methods of a class that can be accessed outside of the class. The user will never see this. The user doesn't know anything about these names and will never interact with these names directly. This is only for developers to build the application. What the users will see is the URL. And we'll see that in the root here in the next section.
Okay.
All right, so again, after show, we have the create function. The create function, of course, just shows the new movie form. So really no logic here. All it's going to do is return a view, the create view. Next, we have the store method. Now, the store method is used to add a new item to the database, in this case, a new movie. And this is basically the structure you would use. So we're going to create a new movie object based off of the movie model. And when we do this, we can then update that object, all the properties of that object, by just using that thin arrow, the dash greater than arrow, setting the column name with a value. Okay, I'll explain this request here in a moment. And so we'll just do that for each column. And then all you have to do is you just add this save method. And Laravel will then take that object and create the new item in the database for us. So again, we're not writing any queries at all. This is what Eloquent is doing for us. Now back to this request right here. So Laravel has created a simplified helper method for allowing us to access data that's been sent through a form. And that's using the request helper function. So we write request, and then we can just put in the name of the input that we want, in this case, movie title. So think of our form. Our form would have an input on it, right? We'd have an input, and it would have a name. And that name would be, in this case, movie title. And because that's movie title, that is what we're getting here. Right? And that will give us whatever value was put inside of this input. And then we'll save it to the movie object, and then that movie object essentially gets saved to the database. Once we're done, once this save has been added to the database, the movie has been added to the database, we're going to redirect back to the home page. Now, this is a method, again, for Laravel, redirect, which allows us to redirect to any URI that we've set up into our roots. So / is the home page, but we might want to switch that to go to our new movie page, which we could do using redirect. All right, so that is store. Any questions? All right, after store, we had the edit. Again, this is very similar to the create method. This will just display that edit movie form. So the only difference is, once again, we're going to retrieve an ID from the URL. That's the movie ID. Then we're going to find that movie to get the movie's data, and we'll pass it to our edit form, or edit view, excuse me. And this would pre-populate that form for us so that the users could then update its data. Once the form is submitted, it would go to the update. It would hit the update. Oh my, okay, I must have overwrote the wrong thing. This is the wrong function. This is the destroy function. Updated the wrong slide. So with the update method, we would see if I can correct this here. So with the update method, we would retrieve a ID from the, excuse me, we retrieve the ID from the URL. Then we would use that ID to retrieve the movie object, get the movie object, and then we would be able to update each of those similar to the way we did create. We will just call each item from that movie, and then we'd be able to reset its value. Then we would use that movie save. So for example, we could do movie title here. And then that would equal to the request, just like we did when we were creating. It's the same process. Movie title equals request, and then, sorry, running out of space there. And then we do the $movie arrow here, and then save. And just like that would create, just like it created the movie when there was a new movie being created, save will update the movie for us. And then we're going to redirect. In this case, we'd probably redirect to that movie page. This function, if you want to look at the actual one, it is out on the course website. All of these functions are out on the course website. That's where I got these from the slide.
I have a question. What if the ID doesn't exist?
If the ID doesn't exist, we should probably be doing some sort of error protection for that. So you want to check to see if the movie has a value, because it would come back as a null value.
Okay. Another question. Those code, where would they go? To the, like, in the mode page or somewhere else?
Sorry, ask that again.
Okay. This code, this kind of public function, like a update, view, or create. Where would we put them to put them to? Like in which page?
So these will all go into the controller, the movie controller in this case. I'm going to go through all this with an actual example here in a moment, and you'll be able to see where they go, but they would all go in the controller. All of these are methods of the movie controller.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. The last one is destroy. We actually just saw this code before in the last page. So with the destroy method, we are going to we'll find that movie like before, and at this time we'll just use the delete method, which will remove the item from the database, and then we'll redirect to the home page. All right, so that's an overview of what those methods will look like. And like I said, we're going to have a kind of hands-on example here at the end of all these slides, and we'll kind of walk through this again. All right, so those are the controllers. Those are RESTful controllers. Then we'll have RESTful routes that will point to those controllers. Okay, so when we talk about RESTful routes, we have to familiarize ourselves with the different HTTP verbs that we'll be working with, because Laravel use those as specific methods that we can call upon when we write our routes. The first one is get. Now, this is the one we've been seeing before. So if you remember when we wrote our routes, we would start with the root class, and then we would do the double colon. This is to access a static method, and then we'd write get, right? And then we'll put stuff inside of there. That's how we were writing our route. So that is the get method, and that is generally for displaying data. That's what we use the get HTTP verb for. Now, we also have post. Now, you should be familiar with posts because these are the two that we've used in the past with like forms in HTML. We have get and we have post. And post is generally used for creating data. So get is for displaying data and post is for creating data. And those two are fairly familiar, but there's some other ones that you might not be familiar with. Put, for example, is for updating data. So we would use the put method when we want to say, when our edit form has been submitted, it would submit to a put method that would point to that update controller. And then the last one is our delete. And then the delete method, of course, will be used for deleting data. All right, so when you put all of these routes together, they might look something like this. So we have, again, this is the one we've seen before, root : get, and then we'll have our URI, right? The path, in this case, just slash, will go to the home page. And we're going to point this to the movies controller. Notice this is our movies controller, and then we do the @ and then this is the method we want to point to, the index method. Now notice that all of them are pointing to the movies controller. The only thing that changes is the method they point to, and then might change the HTTP verb. All right, so that was using a get. That's what we saw before. Now, if we wanted to store a new movie, for example, we would use the same URI. Notice that the same URI is being used here, just the slash. But what changes is that method. All right, so this is for displaying data. This is for creating data. So here we're going to create a new movie, and we're going to use that store method. Then we have our get/create, and this one is for getting to that create form, right? So /create. This one is to get to the edit form. So again, both get, because we're just displaying those forms. And this one has movie. So this is, if you remember, this was our URI parameter variable, essentially. This allows us to create a kind of wild card where the user could put in anything here. Ideally, this is the ID of the movie. So we would do ID movie and then edit, and that will give us to that form with the movie from this ID's data pre-populated in that form. Next, we have our show, right? So this is for showing the movie. And again, we'll do the movie. That's that wild card with the movie ID that we want to look at. And you'll notice that the next three are all the same. There's just slash movie, slash movie, slash movie, but they have the different key verbs here. This is important. That's what allows us to use that same URI. And keeping the same URI keeps our site's kind of friendly URL system fairly easy to remember. All right, so get is going to show the movie, put is going to update the movie, and delete is going to delete the movie. Now, I do want you to take note of the order. Notice that I didn't put these in the order we talked about them. I put them in a specific order. Order does matter when you're writing your routes because the way Laravel runs its URI comparison is it looks at each URI, compares it to what is being put into the browser, and looks for the first match. So if we were to say have this one, the show one, up at the top here, if we had moved it up here with that wildcard in there, none of the other ones like create or movie edit or any of these would be getting access to it because that wildcard would override it. It would come first. So that's why we want to be careful the order in which we put our routes. All right, I understand that this is probably a little hard to grasp as kind of a high level thing. So I think I'm going to stop here and I'm going to jump over to my little hands-on I have prepared, and we're going to walk through kind of how to do that before we jump into the actual forms. All right, so I've got my little movie mayhem project. This is what we had been working on last week, actually the last couple of weeks. We've been just using that movie mayhem database and displaying the data. Now, I have made some slight modifications from last week, mostly visual. All I've done is created a new template, added some styles. Basically, I just added the Bootstrap library, and I'm using their styles to kind of make it look a little bit nicer. So you notice at the top here, we have this nav bar that's going to be used for displaying all movies and one that goes to the new movie form. If I were to click this link right now, it's going to give me a 404 error. And that's because I don't have a root yet for /create. I'll need to create that. So right now it's just giving me a 404. But I do have the root, which is right here, the root / which is pointing to the movie index, which is displaying a list of all the movies. All right. I've also created each movie as a link. And if I hover over it, it's probably a little hard to see on your screen, but it's basically going to Laravel / and then the movie ID. But once again, if I were to click on this, I'm going to get that 404 because I haven't created that root yet, which we're going to do here in a moment. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I've already got the roots page open, so I'm going to create some of the roots that we want here. So that new movie root and the movie page, the movie detail page to show those. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and clear off these other roots that we aren't using. I'm just going to delete those because there's no reason to have them in there. And I'm going to start off where we have the index. So we already have the index. Now I want to create one for this new movie page so I can see something there. So this is to get that new movie form. All right, so it's going to start with root, and this is going to be displaying data because all it's doing is displaying that form. So we're going to use the get method here. And then we use the URI. What path am I going to? Well, I've already set up that path in this link. If I click here, we can see that it goes to Laravel test / create. So that's the path that I want, / create. So that's what I'm going to put here. All right, and this should point to the movies controller at the create method, like so. Now, if I were to save this and refresh the page, it's going to take a moment here to load, we can see that I have an error, right? I'm not getting a 404 anymore because the root does exist. but it is telling me that my create method doesn't exist. It's probably a little hard to see here, but the method create does not exist. All right, and that's because I haven't created it in my movie controller yet. So I'm going to jump over to my movie controller, and I'm going to create that method. So I'm going to do public function create. And from their slides, we know that this method, all it does is display the create form. So all I'm going to do is return the view. Now I've already created this view ahead of time. So it is under the view create. So I can just do view create like that. All right, so I can save that. Get that out of the way. And I will refresh the page. And when I do, we now see the new movie form. Now, again, this form was created ahead of time, but it wasn't being shown until we created this method, which is returning the create view. And Laravel knows to go to this create method because we created the root for the URI/create to point to the create method. Right. So let's do the same thing for the individual movies, so that when we click on one of these movies, we can see the movie instead of this 404. All right. So we're gonna create another route here. And this, once again, is going to be displaying data. That's all it does. So it's going to be using get. And we're going to do slash. And then this next part is a wildcard, right? It's the ID of the movie. So we don't know what that's going to be. But I'm going to just call it movie here as one of those URI parameters. All right. And then we'll do movie controller at. And if you remember, the method that we use to display a single item is the show method. Now, once again, we don't actually have this method created, so we're going to hop back to our controller and create it. I'm going to save my root. I'll go back to the controller, and I'm going to create that show method. So we'll do public function show. Now, this show is going to retrieve or receive the ID of the movie. And it's going to come from this wildcard. We don't actually need to retrieve it or do anything. Laravel does that for us. It's going to pass that as a parameter to this method. So I'm going to just use ID, $ID, and that's going to be the same as the movie. Even though we call it movie, we can call it whatever we want here in the parameters. I'm going to call it ID. From here, we can then retrieve that movie from the database. So I'm going to do movie, and then I'll use the movie method, the movie model, right? And I'm going to use that find method because I'm dealing with the primary key. I can use the find method. If I was want to do, instead of this ID, say I wanted to use some sort of slug here or the name, I wouldn't be able to use find. I would have to use the where, which we were using up here, the where method instead. But because I'm dealing with primary keys here, I can use find. So then I'm going to do $ID. Okay, and that will retrieve my movie. And then I'm going to return the view. Now this view is the show view, and I will pass it the movie data. Okay, and this needs to be passed in as an array. Once I have that, I'll save it and I'll refresh the page. And now we see my movie details. So we have the title of the movie, the year, and the director. And that, again, that's coming from the movie I clicked on. So I clicked on Alien. Let's click on a different one. Let's click on Blade Runner here. So I'll click on Blade Runner, and we can see that now Blade Runner is showing up with its movie details. So that is what the show view is doing for us, because the show controller is retrieving the single movie and sending it off. And of course, we get to this from our root / wildcard, which points to the movie method. or excuse me, the show method. All right. Any questions so far on how this process works?
Um, could you go to the controller?
Yep.
Yeah. So is the show function must come before the create?
No, you can put these in whatever order you want. Order here doesn't matter. I have an order I like to keep them in. That's why I put show between index and create, because I like index and then show and then create. It's kind of the order in which I see things working, but you can mix these up. It doesn't really matter what order. I could put show first, and this is still going to function fine because these order is independent when it comes to the controller.
The order is important in the web.php page. Here?
Yes, here order does matter. For the roots, order does matter. In the controller, it doesn't.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so let's see here. I'm going to add one more here. I'm going to add this edit one so that when we click on this edit button, we will actually see the edit form. Again, once again, we get the 404, and that's because we don't have the root set up. So I'm going to create that root here. So we'll do root get. Again, we're just displaying the edit form. And the URI here is going to be slash, then the wildcard movie, then the static edit slash edit. So it's slash movie ID slash edit. And that is going to take us to the edit method. Okay, which we haven't created yet, but we're going to do here in a moment. So we'll have that, we'll save, and we'll come back here, and now I'm going to create that edit method. So we'll do public function edit. All right. Once again, just like our show method, we're going to have that ID passed to us. We have this wildcard, and even though the wildcard's sort of in the middle of the URI, it's the only wildcard that exists in the URI. So again, Laravel is just going to pass that to the method for us. And once again, we'll call it ID because that's what it's going to hold. And then we'll find that movie, just like we did in show. So we'll use the movie method and then, or excuse me, the movie model, then the find method, and we'll pass an ID in there. Then we'll return the edit view. And we'll pass in the movie data as an array. Okay, like that. Okay, we'll save that and we'll refresh the page. And we can see that we do have the edit movie form, and you can see that it's being pre-populated with the movie we clicked on.
What if we have like two wildcards in the URL?
So then they get passed as two parameters, and they would go in order that they appear in the URI.
Oh, sounds good.
Right. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump back to our slides. We'll talk about forms, how we handle forms now that we've displaying different forms, and then we'll come back and we'll finish up filling out the rest of this application. Okay, so forms in Laravel. So the one thing you have to keep on remember that when we create forms in Laravel, all we're doing is creating HTML forms. But in order to process those forms, Laravel has incorporated many features that allow us to process forms more easily and more safely. So a lot of the stuff that Laravel has put in is there to protect us or to protect our site. The first one is the cross-site request forgery. And what this is to prevent malicious attacks to your form, or more specifically, from a form submitting to your process. So what somebody who's smart enough to understand how forms work is they could see where your form was submitting, then create their own form and submit to that same process. And they could send malicious data to it. They could hijack what you're doing. So what what this does, this cross-site request forgery protection does, is it creates a token for us so that it will know which user is using it and match up whether or not the user is there. I'm going to show you what happens when we don't have this token, and you'll see that it protects us from it. So that's done, again, out of the box. Laravel provides that for us. The other thing Laravel does is it provides method spoofing. So when we create HTML forms, we only have access to two methods, either get or post. So methods that which we talked about before, that we have those 4 different methods. We have get, push, put, get, post, put, and delete. Well, put and delete don't actually exist for HTML forms. So Laravel has created a method spoofing process which allows us to kind of spoof put and delete when we need those. And I'll demonstrate how that looks here in a moment. And lastly, Laravel has a validation system that we can then utilize to validate the data before it comes to our database. All right, so I've got some slides that kind of demonstrate each of these processes. So for that CSR cross-site request forgery, to protect that, or the CSRF, all we need to do for this is really simple, is in order to add that token that we need for our forms, is we add this command right here. So this is a blade directive that we need to add to each of our forms in Laravel. And you must have this here, otherwise the form will not submit, because Laravel will reject it because it's missing that token. Right? And that's it. That's all you have to do for that. For method spoofing, it's something similar. So for example, if we want to have our edit form that will update a movie, well, we would still use the post method. Now, if you remember that the post method we generally used for creating new data, not for updating. Well, we would do that push or post method, and then we would use this method spoofing, this method directive, to then say that, no, this is not a post method. I actually want it to be a put method. Or, for example, if we wanted to use delete, we could put delete here instead of put. So delete. And this would be an effective way of then deleting an item. Right? And so that is pretty much method spoofing. The last one is for validation. Now, I'm not going to go into huge amount of details on how to validate. The validate method is quite elaborate and quite powerful, and there's a lot you can do with it. But at the very basic requirement is you could just set up inputs to be required. Therefore, that if they can't be left blank when they're submitted. And that's what I'm doing here. So I'll use that request method. We'll use that request method that we had used before to retrieve inputs, and we're using it down here. And then we'll use it will tie into the validate method. And that validate method will take an array, and each item in that array will be a input. So in this case, movie title, director, and year. These are inputs on our form. And all I'm going to do here is I'm just saying that they're each required, so they can't be left blank. But I could go further and say, well, movie title can't be blank, and it must be unique, or it must contain a minimum of 10 characters, or something like that. So that is something we could do to validate our items to make sure that we're not getting invalid data coming through. Now, once this is done, once this validate occurs, if Laravel will compare the value that has come from the user to what our requirement is. If it fails the comparison, if it fails the test of validation, any of them, Laravel will halt anything that goes further in the form, and it will return back to the form. So if it fails, the user will submit and they'll be brought back to the form, preventing anything from being passed to the database because it has failed. Right. And then there's more you can do because Laravel will also pass some error messaging along to it as well, which I don't have on my slides at this moment. But you can do that again to then further help the user understand how what went wrong when they submitted the data. Okay, so that is kind of an overview of what Laravel can do for us. Let's go back to our hands-on and let's try and write up some of that stuff so we can see how we can use that information to then submit forms. All right, so I'm going to jump back to my site here. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my new movie form right here, a new movie form. And I'm not even going to input anything here. I'm just going to hit add movie. So I'm going to just click add movie. And it's going to give me an error here. Oh, it's actually saying that the post method doesn't exist, right? I have to create my root first. So let's create the root so that this will actually respond to something. So what we're going to be going to is we just go to this slash URI, and instead of using get, we're going to use post. So I'm going to copy this right here. And I'm going to do slash. We're going to change this get to post because it's going to go over the post protocol. And we'll change index here to store because it's going to point to the store method. Okay. And now I'm going to jump back here. We'll create that method now. So here's the create method. So we'll add store function store. Okay. So now we're going to store the movie to the database. And in order to store a movie, if you remember from the slides, I went through them pretty quickly. But the first step is to create a new movie object. So we're going to set this to the movies variable. And we'll do new movie. Now, movie here is from the movie model. And this will create a movie object, which will allow us to add basically the properties, the column values to this object. And then Laravel will save it for us. So I'm going to set this to update the movie title, which is going to get back from the request movie title. There we go. And then we'll do movie. Let's see, it's year. So this will be request year. And finally, the director. The request director. Okay, so remember, request is coming from the form that was submitted. Once we have updated all those properties to actually save it to the database, we have to do the save method like that. This will actually take all of the properties, create the query for us, send it to the database. Then we're going to do return a redirect. And we're just going to redirect back to the home page.
Excuse me, could you explain the request method or what it's doing here?
Okay, so when we submit something from the form, it's going to be, okay, think back to when we were working with just PHP. And we said we had the $_get and the $_post methods, or the arrays that allows us to get data, right? Get allowed us to get data that was being passed to the URL, and post allowed us to get data that was being passed from a form, right? We worked with this when we were back a while in PHP. You had to use this for Sociology as well, right? That's how we got the data from the forms. This request method is just simplifying that process. So this is a Laravel method that is essentially doing the exact same thing. We're saying, hey, get get the request, get the value movie title from either get or post or wherever it came from. So we're not having to worry, did they send this over get? Did they send this over post? Laravel is doing the hard work for us. All we're telling it is which item to get us. It's going to retrieve that value and return it for us.
Okay. What if the movie title doesn't exist?
Then we'll get back a null.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is basically the same as doing this. Post here, like that.
Okay, understood.
All right. So let's go ahead and save this. I'm going to refresh this page. We'll continue. Okay, so page expired. Yeah, that's going to happen. So I'm going to do this one more time. I'm actually going to put in some movie here. Let's do Titan. And I cannot spell Titanic. I've still spelled that wrong. Year, I don't know what year that came out, like 96. And James Cameron. I am terrible at spelling. That is not right. But anyway, it doesn't matter. Okay, so we submitted this form. Now we'll get this 419 page expired. All right, so we're getting this error because of that protection, that CSRF protection, that cross-site registry forgery, request forgery. That is because we're missing the token. So when we're missing the token, Laravel just comes back with this page expired. All right, so we're going to jump back. Actually, I got to open up my views here. So I got to jump back to my my create view right here. So here are my views, and I need to add that token to my form. And again, because I'm using Blade, all I have to do is do @CSRF. That will add the token to my form, and I won't get this page expired anymore. Okay, so I'm going to save that. We'll go back to my form. I'm going to refresh. Okay, I'll just enter this in again. Oh, wasn't. I'll do that. Sure. Okay, so we're going to add the movie. And here we go. So now we're getting another. Oh, this is because I'm missing some properties. Unknown column. Okay, so this is actually due to the way I've set up the database. Laravel is automatically expecting a column called update at and create at, and those columns don't exist in there. So it's looking for those columns, and because they don't exist, it can't actually post to the form. Now, what we can do is we could overwrite this because we don't actually have these in the database. We can overwrite this to say, don't include update at and create at for that. For your next project, what you're actually going to be using for this course, I'm providing you with the database for that, and it includes this update at and create at. So you will not need to worry about this. There is a way of overriding this, basically telling Laravel not to include or not that these don't exist, and so don't add them. Unfortunately, I've forgotten how to do that, so I'm going to have to look that up at this time. So we can't really do that. Well, actually, let me look this up. This is a good experience, what happens when you don't remember something. So I'm going to go to laravel.com. This is the official website for Laravel. This is also where their documentation resides. So I'm just going to go to their documentation. Now, take note that it is pointing to the 7.0 version. This is the version we are using for Laravel. But just be wary of that sometimes if you're looking online, they might point to an older version. Now, a lot of stuff we're using hasn't really changed much from version to version, but just be aware of that. So now let's go to update at, I don't remember what. So be add, bum, 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 bum. Let's go to models. This is where I have to look things up. Models. So again, this documentation is very elaborate. There's a lot to look at here. Here we go. Just looking at chunking results. Okay, I'll have to look this up later because I don't want to spend too much more time while you guys look this up. I just don't remember how to do it. It's not something I do very often because I usually include those properties in there, so I don't have to worry about this. But there is a way to basically tell Laravel, don't save that information because it's going to do it automatically. And what those do, by the way, the update at and the create at are basically timestamps to let us know when the data has been entered into the database and when it was last updated. It's all about keeping track of the data. All right, but aside from that, this is essentially what we would need to do for the form. Now, we would also want to do some validation of our store method like before. So the way we would do that is we would still use this request method and that validate, just like was in the slides. So we could do request, and it is a method, so like that, and then we'll do that arrow, and then we'll do validate. Now this will take an array, and then we can tell it inside the array what we want for the movie. Okay, so we're going to do movie title. Yeah, and we're going to set this as required. And we'll do year. We're just going to set these all for required. Okay, and we'll set that. All right, so I'm going to add my semicolon. I'm going to comment this out for just 1 second, and then save that. I'm going to come back here. I'm going to refresh this. I'm going to try and submit this form without this data. So I'm going to do add movie. Okay, so when I do that, I still get that error. It's causing this error for the update at. But what it didn't do is it still attempted to submit this query without this movie title, year, and director. All right, so now I'm going to add this validate here back. I'll save that. And I'm going to refresh again. I'm going to resubmit. Well, what did I forget? It is so bad when your demonstrations don't go as planned. Okay, so okay, this is why I should practice things before I demonstrate them. I do apologize. I think I forgot to include something. Well, that should work. What am I doing wrong? Okay. You know what? I will I'm going to make a recording of this. I'll work out what my problems are for these. I'll make a recording and get this actually
Because
working
you
for.
have director as director, it's not says required on the other side.
Oh, yeah, that might be what the problem is. Let's see. Yeah, there you go. Thank you for catching that error. That's what it was. So I had director instead of required. There we go. So then you notice it took me back to this form, and that's because it saw that these things were required and I didn't fill them out. So it sent me back to the form. Okay, so we spent long enough on this, and I've had enough problems with it. So that's basically the rundown on how we build these applications with Laravel. Now, with that said, I do have a recording for a grocery list application that is available on the course website. I walk through the process from start to finish. That's literally, I have nothing. I create my Laravel project. I import the database, all of that. So please do watch that video because it will definitely be very helpful for the final project. All right, so speaking of, let's talk about your final project, which is Task Manager. All right, so Task Manager is a GitHub Classroom assignment, so make sure you solve that. So accept that. So what you're going to be doing is you're going to be building a task manager. Now, a task manager is sort of like a to-do list, except for it's on steroids, so to speak. This task manager will require users to register and sign in to use the application. So everybody has an account. And then the users will be able to create groups, and groups are lists. And so they can have multiple lists going on for their task manager. It's not just one list, it's multiple lists. They're called groups because list is a reserved word in PHP, so I couldn't use lists. So when I talk about groups, think of them as lists. And you will have items. So the user will be able to create list and items. And they'll be able to view these, edit them, and delete them. Then I will be providing you with migration files. Now, these migration files are basically the database structure. So I've already created the database for you. You will need to use the migration files to migrate those. Again, in the video grocery list, I demonstrate how to use migration files because that video works with migration files as well. There is a starter files with grocery list, so you can follow along with that as well. So basically, you're going to be provided with the database, but nothing else. You are going to need to build the Laravel project from scratch. You'll need to create all of your models, your controllers, your views, everything, and you will basically build the project. Now, with that said, in addition to the grocery list video, which I have, which goes through the entire project, I also have, and this is on the assignment page for Task Manager. Let me actually go back to the website here. So here's our course website. I'm just going to go to assignments. Actually, let me go to content first. So here's week 10. So right here's that grocery list recording. So that is the recording with the grocery list project that you can watch. It is actually just part of the recording lecture 9. It's a big chunk of recording lecture 9. I just split it out by itself. In addition to that, you have the task manager assignment, which is right here. You can, right here's the link to accept in GitHub Classroom. But this is the part I want to point out, project setup. Now I go through the project setup here in text, but I have a video tutorials. And now this will link to a YouTube playlist. Once it finished loading, and this playlist contains 6 movies. So depending on your operating system, you'll watch those set of movies. So there's 3 for Mac, and 3 for Windows. This will go through the setup that you will need to do for your final project, including downloading the repository, setting up Laravel, doing the migrations for setting up your database, and setting up authentication with Laravel. So all of that is done in these videos. So I highly recommend you do this, because setting up Laravel through this is a little bit different than the way we did it before, which is why I created these videos. So do watch these videos for setting up the final project. All right, so with that, this is all due. The final project is due August 12th. Okay, so Wednesday, August 12th. All right, any questions about Task Manager? All right, you should have the only other assignment I believe that we have outstanding from Task Manager is the final project reflection. I didn't have a slide for that, but that will also be due August 12th as well with the final project. So that's it. So the only outstanding assignment I think we have left is, other than those two, is the hybrid 4. So you have hybrid 4, and then you have the Task Manager project. Okay, and that's it for this course as far as assignments. All right, and that comes to the end of the lecture as well. So next time, next week, we're going to be talking about authentication. We're not going to be spending too much on this project, or excuse me, on this topic. I'll talk about how authentication works in Laravel, talk briefly about how to set it up, but those videos will actually cover most of the setting up of the authentication. Mostly, I'm just going to talk about how, once you're authenticated, how do you get access to that data? That's what I'll be discussing next week. That will also be our last lecture for this course. The following week, we will have the work period, or excuse me, the class time will just be a work period. I will be logged into Zoom. So if you want to come in to ask questions about your project, that would be a good opportunity to do it. Okay. All right. So are there any final questions before I let you go?
I have a question about authentication. What's the word?
Authentication?
Authentication. Yeah. Because I already set up I follow follow your tutorial, set up the basic things,
Yes.
and I can register a account for user, and
Yep.
but I don't understand the whole the structure. Weird, because if I want to build a blame for the user, is it gonna work for every users, or is just for him? Or
It's for all users. So right. So for example, the home page would be for every user, but it would show the specific user's data. So just like when our movie example, where we had the movie page, the detail page, we didn't create a page for each movie. We created a show page, and then the movie's data was loaded into it. Does that kind of answer your question?
maybe, but I don't quite get it. Because if the user logged into the system, and he's gonna have a separated interface, isn't it?
Well, it's gonna have it logged in. He's gonna still see the same interface as everyone else. It will just be custom for the user.
Okay, but we didn't really talk about the after the user logged in, and I think maybe we need to authorize the step, authorize the users gonna do submit, or do we need to do that extra steps for?
No, well, that's the thing. The beauty of Laravel is that it's taking care of that for us. So once we've set up authentication, Laravel is handling the management of that. So it creates the, as you already know, it creates the kind of login form for us and the registration form. And those users will log in and be registered. And so when they sign in, they're tapped into their account. Now they will have a user ID associated with them. So when we, for example, for Task Manager, if they create a list for their task manager, that list will be associated with their user ID so that only they can see that list and no one else.
Okay, that makes sense. So next, when would we talk about the authority?
Yeah, we'll be talking about authentication, and I'll cover that, kind of what we just talked about, in a little bit more detail on how that will work.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
All right. Any other questions? All right. There's no other questions. That is all I have. Good luck on your final project. Do watch those videos. It will definitely help you getting set up for that. And of course, if you have any more questions, you can always email me. And I'll see you next time. Thank you.